Workers of the world unite. The Industrial Revolution made many people wealthy and brought to the known world the benefits of railways, cotton mills, and tuberculosis. Some people got very wealthy indeed. Others, largely those who did the actual work, lived in dire poverty and terrible working conditions. Christians tried to address this. The great Quaker families, Cadburys, Rowntrees, Terrys and Frys, all worked within the confectionery industry. They built model factories for their workers, provided them with excellent housing, and introduced schools and even leisure facilities, and probably ruined their teeth forever. But they were the exceptions, and as a result there was a steadily growing undercurrent of unrest among the working class. In 1844, a German called Friedrich Engels described their plight in The Condition of the Working Class in England. He wrote of slum conditions, lack of sanitation, families of 8 or 10 sharing a single room. 3 years later, he and his friend, the German economist and philosopher Karl Marx, took over a socialist organisation called the League of the Just, later becoming the famous superhero group, the Justice League, whose members include Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Dialectical Materialism Boy. They rebranded it as the League of Communists, and the following year collaborated on the Communist Manifesto, which called on workers to revolt and seize the means of production. Marx dismissed religion as a drug, an opium of the people, keeping them placid and easily controlled. The communism that eventually emerged from Marx's writing was hostile to Christianity, but there were many socialists who combined both radical political beliefs and their faith. The result was Christian socialism. Many of the leaders of the labour movement in Britain came from the nonconformist chapels and the dissenting churches. The plight of the urban working class was of particular concern to a Methodist minister called William Booth, 1829 to 1912. He formed the Salvation Army, a kind of uniform Christianity. It was teetotal. Booth saw alcohol as one of the great problems of the urban life. The army reached out to people who were left behind by the mainstream denominations. It became a movement known for its commitment to social welfare. The movement embraced innovation. Does it signify by what novel and extraordinary methods we get hold of drunkards, wife-beaters, cutthroats, burglars and murderers, so that we do get them? They asked. So they formed bands, wrote new lyrics to popular songs, toured the pubs. The Salvation Army are now such a part of our social fabric that it is hard to realise just how radical and how persecuted they were when they started. In 1844 alone, 600 army preachers were jailed, and many more ordinary members assaulted. Booth was not an easy man to work with. He was dictatorial and had a medieval pope-like love of appointing his family to official positions. The philanthropist, politician and evangelist Lord Shaftesbury even went so far as to describe Booth as the Antichrist. But much of the antagonism was based on a misunderstanding of what the Sally Army was all about. And when he died, promoted to glory, as the army called it, 40,000 people attended his funeral service, including Queen Mary, who crept in and sat almost unrecognised at the back. Nearly infallible, like this book. The year 1848 was a good year for revolutions. It popped up in France, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Ireland and Italy, forcing Pope Pius IX, 1792 to 1878, to flee Rome disguised as a woman, like you do. Maybe dressing up as a woman gave Pius ideas. In 1854, he issued a papal bull declaring the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, the idea that the Virgin Mary was from the first moment of her conception preserved free from every stain of original sin. The doctrine hadn't been mentioned before the 12th century, and heavyweight critics like Bernard of Clairvaux and Aquinas had dismissed it. But the Pope was the one wearing the trousers, or the trouser suit anyway. For centuries, Italy had been a patchwork of separate states. Now they had come together to fight for independence from their Austrian masters and for unification into Italy. This was opposed by the Pope on the grounds that he didn't want to lose any of his lands. And when I say opposed, I mean opposed. He recruited an army, which was enlarged by the addition of Catholics from across Europe. And in 1860 they marched into battle and lost. Italy united, and it took its revenge. The Pope lost all the papal states and was left with just Rome. This was bad news for the Pope, but good news for all the Jews, who no longer had to live in the papally endorsed ghettos. Pius IX holed up in Rome and, 4 years later, published his Syllabus of Errors, a bullet point list of everything that he considered anti-Christian. It included republicanism, democracy, the separation of church and state, and liberalism. He outlawed any Catholic movements for political reform, and even ordered Italian Catholics not to vote. In 1869, after he'd spent a decade as a prisoner in Rome, he called a council. The First Vatican Council was the first ecumenical council for 300 years. The council declared that when speaking about faith and morals in the exercise of his office as a pastor and teacher of all Christians, the Pope was infallible. A sizable minority of those attending opposed the idea on the basis of, well, the entire history of the papacy, to be honest, but in the end, the doctrine was voted through. Diplomatically, all but two of those opposing decided not to attend the final vote, on the grounds of having some really quite important other things to do. Some of them even formed a splinter church, the Old Catholics, as opposed to the really Old Catholics, which would be the Greek Orthodox Church. Pius worked on the principle that if you said something with enough certainty and confidence, then reality would be frightened into submission. But reality had other ideas. The Pope had been maintained in Rome through the support of the French army. But in 1870, Prussia went to war with France, so the French troops went back to join in the fight. Suddenly, Rome was at the mercy of the newly united Italians. They seized the moment, captured Rome, and offered the citizens the chance to vote on whether they wanted to be ruled by the Pope or become part of Italy. The Roman citizens, remembering their centuries-long association with the papacy, showed the full extent of their gratitude and appreciation by voting in favour of joining Italy by a margin of 100 to 1. Uber-Darwin. Meanwhile, the Prussians easily beat the French, and Bismarck unified Germany. One of those who fought in the Franco-Prussian War was a young philosopher called Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. He went on to become a professor of classical philology, aged just 24. Philology is stamp collecting, probably. He became the prophet of ultra-Darwinism. Survival of the fittest was his religion. Judaism, he believed, had once been a proper man's faith, one of vigour and conquest with lots of blood everywhere. But Israel was defeated, and instead of accepting their weakness as a sign that they had been out-evolved, their religion changed to bang on about love, and how God was on the side of the poor and the needy. And, well, Nietzsche just wanted to shout a great big nine to that. And Christianity, well, that was even worse. It hadn't even bothered to have a brutal conquering phase. Nietzsche despised it and called it one of the most corrupt conceptions of the divine ever attained on earth. Here are a few of his cheerier jottings. What is good? Whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is evil? Whatever springs from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome. The weak and the botched shall perish. First principle of our charity, and one should help them to it. What is more harmful than any vice? Practical sympathy for the botched and the weak. Christianity. Nietzsche believed that the essence of life was the will to power, or the will to power in the original German. Nature rewards the strong, not the weak and the botched. He rejected completely Judeo-Christian ideas of compassion. His philosophy was red in tooth and claw, and in the end it devoured him. He spent the last 11 years of his life insane. But strangely, it never seemed to occur to him that nature had simply deselected him. It is not hard to see Nietzsche in Nietzsche the seeds of the horrors which were to consume Europe in the 20th century. Genocide, eugenics, Nazism, it's all in his dark vision. Once you've decided that some species are doomed to extinction, it is not hard to make the same conclusions about races or individuals. Darwin never dreamed of such a thing, but others took his ideas to their logical conclusion. Darwinism gave a scientific authority to ideas of racial superiority. And, as European colonialism spread across the globe, it promoted the idea of the fitness to rule and to survive of the white races. It led to genocide. On the 19th of January 1864, the Anthropological Society in London arranged a debate on the extinction of the lower races. During the debate, A.R. Wallace, who co-discovered the theory of evolution with Darwin, talked about racial extermination as simply another name for natural selection. This understanding became a core part of colonial theory. And not just out in the colonies. There was mass murder close to home too. For 8 centuries, Armenian Christians had lived under Turkish rule. There were 2 million of them living in the country. When rebellion broke out in some Armenian towns, they were massacred. Between 103,000 100 and 300,000 Armenians lost their lives, and many others were forcibly converted to Islam. Meanwhile, Russia's ancient creaking feudal system was close to collapse, and in 1881, the Tsar, the Caesar, was assassinated by anarchists. The rumour spread that the assassins were Jewish. They weren't. And between 1881 and 1884, a wave of persecution was launched against the Jews in Russia. An estimated 20% of all Jews lived in the country, and in 1881, over 200 pogroms were launched against Jewish communities, often supported by the Orthodox Church, and carried out with the active participation of the police. Many went to America. 1 million went to Europe, where they all lived happily ever after. Wait, I'll get back to you on that one. In 1898, Lord Salisbury, the English Prime Minister, gave a lecture in the Royal Albert Hall. "One can roughly divide the nations of the world," he said, "into the living and the dying." Armenians, Jews, were they living or dying?